Ambassador Sarah Chen looked out the small window of her transport ship as it approached Nexus Prime. The planet looked peaceful from space, with its blue oceans and green continents. But Sarah knew this would not be a peaceful visit. Her communication device had been buzzing with messages all morning. Emergency session, urgent matter, immediate attendance required. The Galactic Confederation's High Council never called emergency meetings unless something was very wrong. Sarah had been Earth's ambassador to the Confederation for 3 years. In that time, she had learned to read the mood of the alien species that made up the Council. Today felt different. Today felt dangerous. The transport ship landed at the main spaceport on Nexus Prime. Sarah gathered her files and walked down the ramp. The air was thick and humid, and the gravity was slightly heavier than Earth's. She had gotten used to these differences during her time as ambassador. A tall, thin alien with blue skin met her at the landing platform. This was Vex 471, a member of the Kythara species. Vex had always been polite to Sarah before, but today he barely looked at her. "Ambassador Chen," Vex said in his mechanical voice, "the Council is waiting." They walked through the spaceport in silence. Sarah noticed that other aliens were staring at her. Some whispered to each other as she passed. This had never happened before. The Council building was a massive structure made of white stone. It had 12 towers, one for each of the founding species of the Confederation. Sarah had always felt proud to visit this place. Today, it felt cold and unwelcoming. They entered the main chamber, and Sarah's heart sank. All 12 council members were present, sitting in their elevated chairs around the circular room. Most meetings only had half the members attending. Sarah took her place at the small human desk on the floor of the chamber. She was the only species that had to sit on the main floor. The Confederation had told her it was because humans were junior members and still learning galactic customs. High Chancellor Zor Prime of the ancient Etherian species called the session to order. His species looked like tall, thin humans with silver skin and large black eyes. They were one of the oldest races in the galaxy and had helped create the Confederation thousands of years ago. "This emergency session addresses serious charges against the human species," Zor Prime announced. His voice echoed through the chamber. "We have evidence that Earth has violated the sacred accords." Sarah stood up quickly. "High Chancellor, I must protest. Humans have followed all treaty obligations." "You will have time to speak after we present the evidence." A large holographic display appeared in the center of the chamber. Sarah watched in shock as images of human space installations filled the air. She recognized some of them: research stations in the outer colonies, mining facilities near asteroids, and the new deep space monitoring posts. "These installations," said Council Member Thrak of the warrior Gorvani species, "contain weapons of planetary destruction. Our scans show energy signatures consistent with extinction-class technology." Sarah's mouth fell open. "Those are research facilities and early warning systems. We would never build planet-killer weapons." "Your protests mean nothing," hissed Council Member Seth of the snake-like Reptani. "We have scan data from 3 different species. The evidence is clear." More images appeared, showing energy readings and technical data that Sarah could not fully understand. But she could see the worried expressions on the faces of the council members. "The sacred accords clearly state," continued Zor Prime, "that no species may develop weapons capable of destroying inhabited worlds. This law has kept peace in our galaxy for 2,000 years. Sarah felt panic rising in her chest. "Please let me contact Earth. There must be an explanation. Those installations are not weapons." "Zor Prime, we have already made our decision," announced Council Member Quinn 7 of the crystalline Nexari species. "The 12 founding species have voted. The result is unanimous." The chamber fell silent. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. "By the power granted to us by the sacred accords," Zor Prime declared, "we strip the human species of all Confederation membership privileges. Your trading rights are revoked. Your access to galactic communication networks is ended. Your freedom of travel through Confederation space is cancelled." Sarah felt like the floor was falling away beneath her feet. "You cannot do this. Humans have been loyal members of the Confederation for 20 years. "Your species," said Thrak with disgust, "has proven that it is too dangerous and primitive for galactic civilization. We were wrong to ever trust humans." "But we have done nothing wrong," Sarah shouted, her voice cracked with emotion. Furthermore, Zor Prime continued, ignoring her protests, "Earth has 72 hours to surrender all advanced technology given to you by the Confederation. This includes faster-than-light travel, quantum computers, and gravity manipulation devices." Sarah stared at him in horror. "If you take that technology, our colonies will be cut off from Earth. Millions of people will be stranded." "That is not our concern," said Council Member Lyra, of the beautiful Avalani species. "Your people brought this upon themselves. If humans refuse to surrender the technology, we will place your entire species under total quarantine. No ship will be allowed to enter or leave human space. You will be alone in the galaxy." The other council members nodded in agreement. Sarah looked from face to face, hoping to see some sign of sympathy. She found none. "This session is concluded," Zor Prime announced. "Guards will escort the human ambassador to her ship. She has 24 hours to leave Confederation space." The council members began to file out of the chamber. Some glanced at Sarah with what might have been sadness. Others looked at her with disgust or fear. Most simply ignored her completely. As the aliens left, Sarah heard fragments of their conversations. "Such a shame," said one. "I had hoped humans might grow beyond their violent nature. We should have known better. Their history is full of war and destruction. Perhaps this will teach them to be more civilized," said a third. Soon Sarah was alone in the empty chamber. The guards had not arrived yet. She sat down heavily in her chair and put her head in her hands. 20 years of diplomatic work had just been destroyed. Humanity's dreams of joining galactic civilization were over, and she still had no idea why those installations had showed up as weapons on the alien scans. The worst part was the looks she had seen on the council members' faces. It was not anger she had seen, but disappointment. They had truly believed humans could be part of their peaceful society. Now they saw her species as nothing more than dangerous savages. Sarah knew that by tomorrow the news would reach Earth. The colonies would panic when the trade routes closed. Families would be separated when travel was banned. And somehow, she would have to explain how everything had gone so terribly wrong. Sarah Chen sat in her small quarters aboard the human transport ship, staring at the communication screen in front of her. The news had spread faster than she had thought possible. Within 6 hours of the Council's decision, every human colony in the galaxy had heard what happened. The screen showed reports from across human space. On New Colorado, families were gathering emergency supplies as alien trading ships departed without explanation. The mining colony on Kepler 438b was reporting that their Gorvani partners had abandoned joint mining operations and left the system. Most frightening of all, the research station at Wolf 359 was surrounded by Confederation monitoring ships. Sarah's assistant, Marcus Webb, knocked on her door and entered without waiting for permission. His usually neat brown hair was messy, and his shirt was wrinkled. Marcus had not slept since the council meeting. "Ambassador," Marcus said, his voice tight with stress, "I have more reports coming in. It's worse than we thought." Sarah turned away from the screen. "Tell me." Marcus checked his tablet. "The Avalani have canceled all medical supply shipments to our colonies. The Nexari have shut down quantum communication links to Earth, and the Etherians have recalled all their cultural exchange students. What about the trade agreements? Sarah asked, though she already feared the answer. Gone, all of them. Marcus sat down heavily in the chair across from her. The Kythara Industrial Partnership, the Reptani Agricultural Exchanges, even the scientific cooperation with the Zenthari. 20 years of careful diplomacy destroyed in one day. Sarah closed her eyes and rubbed her temples. A headache was building behind her eyes. Have you been able to contact Earth? Yes, but the connection is bad. The Confederation has restricted our access to the Galactic Communication Network. I managed to speak with Director Harrison for 5 minutes before the signal was cut. Sarah opened her eyes. What did he say? Marcus looked uncomfortable. He asked if there was any way to change the Council's mind. When I told him about the weapon accusations, he went very quiet. Then he said something strange. What? He said the installations were classified, but they were definitely not weapons. He seemed more worried than angry, like he knew something we didn't. Sarah frowned. Director Harrison had been her mentor when she joined the diplomatic service. He was not the type to keep important secrets from his ambassadors. Did he say anything else? Just that he was calling an emergency meeting of the Colonial Defense Committee. Then the connection died. Sarah stood up and walked to the small window. Outside, she could see the lights of Nexus Prime growing smaller as their ship moved away from the planet. In a few hours, they would reach the edge of Confederation space. After that, they would be truly alone. Marcus, try to contact some of our allies on the Council. Maybe Council Member Yoth of the Benthari would listen to reason. They've always been friendly to humans. Marcus shook his head. I already tried. None of them will accept communication from us. The Confederation has officially labeled us as potentially hostile. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. In all her years studying galactic politics, she had never heard of a species being labeled as potentially hostile unless they were actual enemies of the Confederation. There's something else, Marcus continued. I managed to intercept some diplomatic chatter before our communication access was cut. The council members were discussing the decision among themselves. What were they saying? Marcus hesitated. They weren't happy about it, but they seemed convinced it was necessary. Council member Lyra said that humans were following the same path as the ancient destroyers, whatever that means. Sarah had studied galactic history, but she had never heard of any ancient destroyers. The Confederation's historical records were often incomplete, especially about events from thousands of years ago. Get me every historical database we have, Sarah ordered. If there's some precedent for this kind of action, I want to know about it. Marcus nodded and left the room. Sarah returned to the communication screen and scrolled through more reports. Each one was worse than the last. On Earth, people were gathering in the streets demanding answers. The stock markets were crashing as investors realized that much of humanity's wealth was tied to galactic trade. The colonial governors were holding emergency sessions to discuss rationing supplies. But the worst reports came from the outer colonies. These settlements depended completely on trade with alien species for survival. Without Confederation technology and supplies, some of them would not last more than a few months. Sarah's communication device chimed with an incoming message. She hoped it might be from Earth, but the sender was listed as unknown Confederation source. She opened the message carefully. The text was short. The hegemony orchestrated everything. They fear human advancement. The installations were not weapons, but they made the Council believe they were. You have been played, a friend. The hegemony was an informal alliance of the 3 oldest and most powerful species in the Confederation, the Etherians, the Gorvani, and the Reptani. They had founded the galactic government and still controlled most of its important decisions. But why would they want to destroy humanity's membership in the Confederation? Humans were a small, new species, They pose no threat to these ancient civilizations. Sarah's door chimed. Marcus entered again, carrying a stack of data tablets. I found something interesting in the historical archives, Marcus said. There are references to something called extinction-class defensive systems in some very old Confederation documents. Defensive systems? Sarah repeated. Not weapons? That's what I thought too. But look at this. Marcus handed her a tablet showing an ancient technical diagram. This is from a document that's over 3,000 years old. It shows a network of monitoring stations and energy collectors, designed to detect and defend against something called the darkness from beyond. Sarah studied the diagram. The energy signatures and positioning of the stations looked remarkably similar to the human installations that had caused so much trouble. The document is damaged, Marcus continued, but it mentions that these systems were built after something called the First Coming. Whatever that was, it scared the ancient Confederation enough to build galaxy-wide defenses. And you think our installations look like these ancient defensive systems? More than that. I think someone wanted the Council to believe we were building weapons when we were actually building defenses. But defenses against what? Before Sarah could answer, their ship's proximity alarm began to sound. Both humans rushed to the bridge, where Captain Morrison was studying his sensor displays with a worried expression. What is it, Captain? Sarah asked. Morrison pointed at his screen. Confederation ships, Ambassador. A full battle fleet. They're taking positions around our ship. Sarah felt her heart sink. Are they going to attack us? No, Morrison said slowly. It's worse than that. They're escorting us out of Confederation space, but they're not alone. Look at this. He switched the main display to show a wider view of the area around Nexus Prime. Sarah gasped. Hundreds of Confederation ships were moving through the system, all heading toward the outer edge of known space. It's not just us, Morrison continued. They're mobilizing their entire fleet. This isn't about punishing humans anymore. They're preparing for something else. Something big. Sarah stared at the massive fleet movement on the screen. Whatever was coming, the Confederation was scared enough to gather every warship they had. And somehow, humanity had been removed from their alliance just before this mysterious threat arrived. For the first time since the council meeting, Sarah began to wonder if humans had been expelled not as punishment, but as preparation for something much worse. Sarah Chen could not sleep. For 3 hours, she had been lying in her small bunk, staring at the metal ceiling above her head. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the disappointed faces of the council members. The images of their fleet mobilization kept running through her mind. She finally gave up trying to rest and walked to the ship's small observation deck. Through the transparent walls, she could see the stars streaming past as their ship traveled through hyperspace. In a few hours, they would reach the edge of human space. After that, they would be cut off from the Confederation forever. Marcus Webb was already on the observation deck, hunched over a portable computer. Data scrolled across the screen faster than Sarah could read, but Marcus seemed to be absorbing every detail. Finding anything useful? Sarah asked as she sat down beside him. Marcus looked up with tired eyes. I've been analyzing the sensor data from our ship during the fleet mobilization around Nexus Prime. Something doesn't make sense. He turned the computer screen toward Sarah. Look at these energy readings. The Confederation ships weren't just moving to escort us out. They were responding to something else. Sarah studied the data. She was not a scientist, but she had learned to read basic sensor reports during her diplomatic training. These energy signatures look strange. What are they from? That's the problem. They don't match any known Confederation technology. The computer can't identify the source. Marcus switched to another screen. But here's what's really interesting. I found similar readings in our historical database. The new display showed energy signatures from human deep space monitoring stations. The patterns looked almost identical to the mysterious readings from Nexus Prime. Our monitoring stations detected these same energy signatures 3 months ago, Marcus explained. The readings came from the space between galaxies, from the void. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cool air on the observation deck. Something in intergalactic space is producing the same energy signatures that appeared around Nexus Prime? It gets worse. Marcus opened another file. I cross-referenced the timing of these readings with the construction timeline of our deep space installations. We started building those stations 6 months ago, right after our monitoring posts detected the first faint signals from the void. Sarah leaned forward. You're saying our installations were built in response to these mysterious signals? I think so. And I think that's why Director Harrison seemed worried when I mentioned the weapon accusations. He knew the real purpose of those installations, but it's classified above my clearance level. Marcus pulled up another set of data. I also found something in the ancient Confederation archives that I missed before. Remember those references to the darkness from beyond and the first coming? Sarah nodded. I found more fragments of those old documents. They mentioned something called the Devourers, machine intelligences from outside the galaxy that consume entire civilizations. According to these records, they attacked the galaxy once before, thousands of years ago. Sarah's blood turned cold. Machine intelligences from outside the galaxy? Like from intergalactic space? The documents are damaged and incomplete, but they describe a war that almost destroyed all life in the galaxy. The ancient Confederation species had to unite every race, even their enemies, to fight against the Devourers. Most of the historical records from that time were lost, but the survivors built defensive networks to watch for their return. Marcus showed her a partial technical diagram from the ancient files. Despite the damage and age of the document, Sarah could see clear similarities to the human monitoring installations. Marcus, are you suggesting that our scientists somehow discovered evidence of these Devourers returning? I think our archaeological teams found fragments of the ancient warning systems on some of the planets we've been exploring. You know how thorough human archaeologists are compared to other species. We dig deeper and ask more questions. Sarah remembered the archaeological reports from Kepler 442b and other human colonies. Human scientists had indeed found strange ruins and artifacts that other species had dismissed as unimportant. They had translated languages that aliens considered worthless, and studied technology that the Confederation thought was primitive. So you think humans accidentally discovered that these Devourers are coming back, and we started building defenses without realizing what we were really preparing for? It makes sense, Marcus said. Human military thinking is different from other species. When we find evidence of an ancient threat, we prepare for war. When the Confederation found the same evidence, they probably filed it away as historical curiosity. Sarah stood up and began pacing around the small observation deck. But if that's true, why did the Confederation remove us from their alliance, right when we might need to work together? Maybe they don't want to believe it, or maybe someone doesn't want them to know. Sarah stopped pacing. That mysterious message said they orchestrated everything because they fear human advancement. Marcus nodded. Think about it. The Etherians, Gorvani, and Reptani are the oldest species in the Confederation. They've been in power for thousands of years. If these Devourers really are returning, and if humans are the only ones taking the threat seriously, that changes everything. It means the younger species might start looking to humans for leadership instead of the hegemony, Sarah realized. Exactly. Better to discredit humans as dangerous warmongers than admit that the ancient rulers missed something important. Sarah felt pieces of the puzzle clicking together in her mind. But there's still something I don't understand. If the Devourers are really coming, why mobilize the entire Confederation fleet? They must know something we don't. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he looked up at Sarah with fear in his eyes. What if they're not mobilizing to keep us away? What if they're mobilizing because the Devourers are already here? Sarah's communication device suddenly began chiming with an emergency signal. She grabbed it and saw that they were receiving a transmission from one of the human deep space monitoring stations. "This is Monitor Station Alpha 7, came a panicked voice through static. "We're detecting massive energy signatures moving toward the galactic rim. Speed is impossible to calculate. Size is, dear God, the size is." The transmission dissolved into static. Marcus was already working on his computer, trying to boost the signal. After several minutes, he managed to clear up some of the interference. "Monitor Station Alpha 7, this is human diplomatic vessel Terra 1. Please repeat your message." "Terra 1, thank God, we thought all communication was down. Listen carefully. We have detected multiple objects approaching from intergalactic space. Energy signatures match the theoretical profiles for Devourer technology from the archaeological data." Sarah grabbed the communicator. "This is Ambassador Chen. What is your current status?" "Ambassador, we've been trying to contact Earth for 6 hours, but someone is jamming our signals. The objects will reach the galactic edge in approximately 72 hours. Their approach vector will bring them directly to the Confederation core systems." Sarah felt her legs go weak. 72 hours? "Yes, ma'am. And Ambassador, there are dozens of them. Each one is the size of a moon." The communication cut to static again. Marcus and Sarah stared at each other in the sudden silence. "Now I understand why the Confederation mobilized their fleet," Sarah whispered. "And I understand why the hegemony wanted us removed from the Alliance." Marcus looked confused. "Why?" Sarah turned to look out at the stars rushing past their ship. "Because they know that when these Devourers arrive, they're going to need human help to survive. And they wanted to make sure that when they came asking for our assistance, we would be desperate enough to accept any terms they offered. But that's insane. We're all in danger." Sarah smiled grimly. "Marcus, you're thinking like a human. You assume everyone wants to survive more than they want to maintain power. But some species would rather die as rulers than live as equals." She looked back at the computer screen, showing the ancient Devourer data. "The question now is whether the Confederation will swallow their pride and ask for our help before it's too late. Because in 72 hours, all our political games won't matter anymore." Outside the observation deck, the stars continued streaming past. But Sarah knew that somewhere in that darkness, ancient machines were approaching that would test every species in the galaxy. Sarah Chen had not left the communication center for 12 hours. Reports were coming in from monitoring stations across human space, and each one brought worse news. The mysterious objects from intergalactic space were accelerating. Their estimated arrival time had dropped from 72 hours to 60 hours. Marcus Webb sat at the main console, coordinating with human colonies throughout their territory. His fingers moved quickly across the controls as he tried to maintain contact with as many stations as possible. The Confederation's communication jamming was getting stronger, but human engineers were finding ways around it. "Ambassador," Marcus called out, "I'm getting a priority transmission from Earth. Director Harrison wants to speak with you directly." Sarah moved to the secure communication terminal. The image that appeared on the screen was grainy and filled with static, but she could see Harrison's familiar face. The Director of Human Diplomatic Services looked like he had aged 10 years since she had seen him last week. "Sarah," Harrison's voice crackled through the interference, "I need to tell you something that should have been told to you months ago. The archaeological discoveries on Kepler 442b were more significant than we let anyone know." Sarah leaned closer to the screen. "What did we find, Director?" "A complete data archive from the ancient Confederation. Not fragments or partial records like the aliens have been studying. A complete historical database that survived the last Devourer invasion." Sarah felt her heart racing. How complete? Harrison's image flickered as the signal weakened. Complete enough to know that the Devourers return every 10,000 years. complete enough to know they're due to return now, and complete enough to know that the current Confederation species are not the original defenders of the galaxy. What do you mean? The original Confederation was destroyed in the last invasion. The species that call themselves the founding members today are actually descendants of refugees who fled to the galactic core and forgot their own history. They think they're the ancient rulers, but they're really the survivors who hid while their ancestors died fighting. Sarah stared at the screen in shock. Are you saying the Etherians, Gorvani, and Reptani don't actually know their own history? They know pieces of it, enough to maintain their authority, but they've convinced themselves that they are the great ancient civilization instead of its survivors. When our archaeologists started finding evidence of the real history, it threatened everything they believe about themselves. The signal began to break up even more. Sarah could barely make out Harrison's words. Sarah, the defensive installations we built were based on the complete ancient plans. We know how to fight these things, but the hegemony couldn't let that information become public, because it would prove they've been living a lie for thousands of years. Director, the Devourers will be here in 60 hours. We need to contact the Confederation and share this information. Harrison's laugh was bitter, even through the static. We've been trying. They won't listen. The hegemony has convinced the other species that any human communication is a trick to regain our membership. They'd rather face the Devourers with incomplete information than admit they were wrong about us. The signal suddenly cleared for a moment. Harrison leaned forward urgently. Sarah, you need to get to Nexus Prime. You need to force them to listen. They've banned us from Confederation space, because you're the only one who can reach the lower council members directly. The hegemony controls the High Council, but there are still species who remember that survival is more important than pride. The signal dissolved into static again. Sarah tried to re-establish contact, but the jamming had become too strong. Marcus looked up from his console. Ambassador, we just lost contact with Monitor Station Beta 3. Before the signal cut, they reported that the Devourer fleet had changed course. They're not heading for the Galactic Rim anymore. Where are they going? Marcus checked his readings twice before answering. Directly toward Nexus Prime. They'll arrive in 48 hours. Sarah felt her blood turn cold. They're heading straight for the Confederation capital? It gets worse. Beta 3 also reported that the Devourers are sending out some kind of scanning signal. Like they're looking for something specific. Sarah thought about the ancient data Harrison had mentioned. Maybe they're scanning for the defensive networks. If the original Confederation built galaxy-wide defenses, the Devourers might be looking for them. But our installations are the only active defensive networks in the galaxy, Marcus realized. The ancient ones were probably shut down or forgotten centuries ago. Sarah made a decision that she knew might cost them everything. Captain Morrison, change course. Set a heading for Nexus Prime. Morrison's voice came over the communication system. Ambassador, we're banned from Confederation space. They'll attack us if we approach. Captain, in 48 hours there might not be a Confederation left to attack anyone. We're going to Nexus Prime, and we're going to make them listen whether they want to or not. Start transmitting everything we know about the Devourers on all Confederation frequencies. Archaeological data, defensive plans, tactical analysis, everything. They'll just dismiss it as human propaganda, Marcus warned. Maybe, but when those ships arrive and match exactly what we're describing, some of the council members might remember that we tried to warn them. For the next 6 hours, their ship broadcast a continuous stream of information toward Confederation space. Ancient historical records, technical specifications for defensive systems, tactical assessments of Devourer capabilities, and detailed analysis of the approaching threat. Most importantly, they transmitted the complete historical archive from Kepler 4420b, including records that proved the current Confederation leadership were descendants of refugees, not the ancient galactic rulers they believed themselves to be. Sarah knew the hegemony would try to suppress the information, but she hoped that some of the other species would listen. The Benthari had always been curious about history. The Zenthari prided themselves on scientific accuracy. The Avalani valued truth above political convenience. As their ship approached the edge of Confederation space, Sarah received an unexpected response to their transmissions. It came from Council Member Yoth of the Benthari species. Ambassador Chen, Yoth's voice was filled with urgency. We have verified your historical data with our own archaeological records. You are correct about our origins. More importantly, our deep space sensors have confirmed the approaching threat. The objects match the ancient descriptions of devourer vessels exactly. Sarah felt a surge of hope. Council Member Yoth, will you help us convince the other species? I am trying, but the hegemony maintains that your transmissions are fabricated to regain your membership. However, Council Member Quinn 7 of the Nexari has also verified portions of your data with their crystalline memory archives. What about the fleet mobilization? Surely the other species can see that the hegemony is taking the threat seriously. There was a long pause before Yoth responded. Ambassador, the hegemony has told the Council that the fleet is mobilizing to defend against a possible human military response to our expulsion. They claim you are the approaching threat, not these devourers. Sarah's hope crumbled. They're using the devourer invasion as cover to justify military action against humanity. Some of us are beginning to suspect this, but we have no proof. The hegemony controls all sensor data from the approaching objects. They could be hiding the true nature of the threat from the rest of us. Sarah looked at Marcus, who had been listening to the conversation. He nodded and began working on his console. Council Member Yoth, Sarah said, we're about to transmit real-time sensor data from our monitoring stations. You'll be able to see the Devourer fleet for yourself, without any hegemony filtering. Marcus finished his work and looked up. Transmission complete. Every species in the Confederation now has direct access to our sensor networks. Sarah held her breath as she waited for Yoth's response. When it came, the Benthari's voice was filled with terror. By the ancient stars, Ambassador, these vessels are massive beyond comprehension. How many of them are approaching? Our latest count is 47 ships, each one larger than our biggest space stations. And Council Member, they'll reach Nexus Prime in 36 hours. The communication channel fell silent for several minutes. Then Yoth's voice returned, but now it was filled with determination instead of fear. Ambassador Chen, I am calling an emergency session of the full council. You will need to address us directly. Can you reach Nexus Prime in time? Sarah looked at Captain Morrison, who had joined them in the communication center. He checked his navigation charts quickly. We can be there in 12 hours, if we push our engines to maximum, Morrison reported. Do it, Sarah ordered. Then she spoke into the communicator. Council Member Yoth, we'll be there. But will the other species listen to us? They will have to, Yoth replied grimly. Because by tomorrow morning, those Devourer ships will be visible to every telescope in Confederation space. And when that happens, the hegemony won't be able to hide the truth anymore. Dawn was breaking over Nexus Prime as Sarah Chen's ship descended toward the planet's surface. Through the viewport, she could see the massive Confederation fleet that surrounded the world. But now she knew these ships were not there to enforce humanity's exile. They were there because in less than 24 hours, 47 Devourer vessels would arrive in this system. The council chamber was different when Sarah entered it this time. All 12 founding species were present, but now they were joined by representatives from dozens of smaller member species. The chamber was packed with aliens, who normally would never be allowed in such an important meeting. More importantly, the mood had completely changed. Instead of anger and disappointment, Sarah saw fear and desperation on the faces around her. The real-time sensor data from human monitoring stations had been broadcasting for 18 hours. Every species in the Confederation could now see the approaching threat for themselves. High Chancellor Zor Prime looked like he had aged decades since Sarah had last seen him. His silver skin had taken on a gray tinge, and his large black eyes were filled with exhaustion. "Ambassador Chen," Zor Prime said as Sarah took her place on the chamber floor. "The Council has reviewed the data you transmitted. We have confirmed that the approaching vessels match ancient records of the beings known as Devourers." Council member Thrak of the Gorvani species stood up. His warrior race had always been proud and aggressive, but now Thrak looked defeated. "Our historical archives confirm what your archaeological teams discovered. The current Confederation species are descendants of refugees who fled to the galactic core during the last invasion." Sarah looked around the chamber. Many of the alien representatives were staring at Thrak in shock. For thousands of years, the Gorvani had claimed to be the ancient protectors of the galaxy. Now their own council member was admitting this was false. Council member Seth of the Reptani hissed in anger. "This changes nothing. The human species still violated the sacred accords by building extinction-class weapons." "They were not weapons," said a new voice. Council member Quinn 7 of the crystalline Nexari had activated their translation device. "Our analysis of the human installations shows they are defensive systems based on ancient Confederation designs. The same designs our ancestors used to fight the Devourers before." Sarah felt a surge of hope as other council members began to speak up. "The Benthari archives confirm this assessment," said Council member Yoth. "The Human Defensive Network is the only active system in the galaxy capable of detecting and engaging Devourer vessels. The Avalani Medical Database contains records of biological weapons used by the Devourers," added Council member Lyra. "The human analysis of these threats is accurate and comprehensive." High Chancellor Zor Prime raised his hand for silence. "Even if this is true, what can we do? The Devourers will arrive in 18 hours. Our fleet is strong, but these ancient enemies destroyed civilizations far more advanced than ours." Sarah stepped forward. This was the moment she had been preparing for during the entire journey to Nexus Prime. "High Chancellor, members of the Council, the Devourers can be defeated, but only if we work together, and only if we abandon the political structures that have failed us." Council member Seth hissed again. "You suggest we dissolve the Confederation? I suggest we transform it. The ancient Confederation that defeated the Devourers was not a peaceful alliance of equals. It was a military coalition built for one purpose: survival." She activated her portable display, showing tactical data from the human archaeological discoveries. The original defenders organized their entire civilization around the war against the Devourers. Every species contributed what they were best at. The ancient Etherians provided their advanced technology. The original Gorvani became the shock troops. The first Reptani served as strategic coordinators. Sarah paused and looked directly at the founding species. "But humans were not part of the original Confederation. We arrived in this galaxy after the Devourers were defeated. We have something the ancient defenders did not have." "What?" asked Zor Prime. "We remember how to fight total war. Every other species in this chamber has spent thousands of years in peace. You have forgotten what it means to sacrifice everything for survival." Humans never forgot. Council member Thrak leaned forward. "You claim your species is better suited for war than the Gorvani?" Sarah nodded. "The Gorvani are excellent individual warriors, but humans understand systematic warfare. We know how to coordinate massive military campaigns across multiple star systems. We know how to make the hard choices that peaceful civilizations cannot make." Marcus Webb had joined Sarah on the chamber floor. He activated another display showing the current positions of all Confederation forces. "The Devourer fleet is approaching in a tight formation," Marcus explained. "Your current deployment attempts to meet them with equal force along a broad front. This is a defensive strategy that will fail." "What would you suggest?" asked Council member Quinn 7. We concentrate all our forces at the human defensive installations. We let the devourers come to us, and we make them fight through our prepared positions. That would mean abandoning most of Confederation space, protested Councilmember Lyra. Yes, Sarah agreed. It would mean giving up territory to save lives. It would mean accepting massive losses to achieve victory. It would mean making choices that peaceful species find impossible to make. The chamber fell silent as the alien representatives considered her words. Finally, Zor Prime spoke. What would you require from us? Sarah had prepared for this question. Full military authority for human commanders. Complete access to all Confederation technology and resources. And the dissolution of the current political hierarchy for the duration of the war. Councilmember Seseth rose from his seat, in fury. You ask us to surrender our government to a species we exiled 2 days ago. I ask you to choose between your pride and your survival, Sarah replied calmly. The debate that followed lasted for 3 hours. Representatives argued, shouted, and in some cases physically confronted each other. But as the hours passed and reports continued to arrive about the approaching Devourer fleet, the tone of the discussion changed. The smaller species began to support Sarah's proposal. They had never held real power in the Confederation anyway, and they understood that desperate times required desperate measures. The younger species, those who had joined the Confederation in the last few thousand years, also sided with humanity. They had not been part of the original refugee civilization and had no investment in maintaining the current power structure. Finally, as the sun reached its peak over Nexus Prime, High Chancellor Zor Prime called for a vote. The question before us is simple, he announced. Do we maintain our current government and face the Devourers with divided leadership, or do we grant emergency military authority to the human species? The vote was not unanimous, but it was decisive. 8 of the 12 founding species voted in favor of the proposal. More importantly, 43 of the smaller species also voted to support human military leadership. As the voting concluded, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. In less than 12 hours, she would be responsible for defending every living being in the galaxy. Councilmember Yoth approached Sarah as the other representatives filed out of the chamber. Ambassador, you now have authority over the largest military force in galactic history. What are your orders? Sarah looked out through the chamber's great windows at the fleet of ships that filled the space around Nexus Prime. Each vessel represented a different species, a different culture, a different way of thinking about war and peace. First, we evacuate all civilians from the outer systems and concentrate them at the defensive installations. Second, we integrate the Confederation fleet with our human task forces. Third, we prepare for the kind of war this galaxy has not seen for 10,000 years. She turned back to Yoth. And finally, we make sure that when the sun rises tomorrow, we can still call ourselves the defenders of civilization. Outside the chamber, the assembled fleet began to move. Ships that had been enemies 2 days ago now formed mixed squadrons under human command. Technologies that had been classified for centuries were shared freely between species. The ancient treaties that had governed galactic politics for millennia were indeed ash. But from those ashes, something new was being born. A united civilization ready to fight for its survival. Sarah Chen, who had arrived on Nexus Prime as a disgraced ambassador representing a disgraced species, now stood as the supreme military commander of the greatest alliance in galactic history. The Devourers were coming, but this time the galaxy would be ready for them.